Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, subscribe to us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we will be getting started shortly. Okay, my name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select both panelists and attendees when responding so that we all know who is here. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any resources and slides shared during the conversation, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered. We'll also be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. I also want to take a moment to introduce some of our upcoming webinars that we have. Later this afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a session on Beyond the ESSER Funding Cliff, Local Supports to Sustain High Impact Tutoring. Next week on April 18th, we have an exciting doubleheader, starting with a funder-to-funder conversation at 12:30 Eastern Time on investing in kindergarten as a sturdy bridge, philanthropic opportunities, and followed by building a parent-centered ecosystem for out-of-school learning. On April 25th, we invite you to wrap up the month of April with us for a session on community engagement initiatives, a framework for sustainable systemic change. Registration and information for those sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope that you will register and join us. Joining you now is Malai Amfar, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much, Sierra. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody that's joining us today. I'm really super excited about this conversation and happy to kick things off. It is a true joy when we come across a community story that does serve as both a source of inspiration and a clear example of systems change on so many levels. And this is exactly what we have with the team from the New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Today, you will hear from leaders of the mobilization effort that moved voters to approve a historic measure, resulting in millions of dollars dedicated to early childhood programs and wraparound supports for families. In their story, you will hear about the urgency that brought them to step up, the ways in which they engaged the community, and who became their allies. You will see the messaging used and learn how they overcame challenges when the road wasn't so smooth. Here at the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading, we do hold dear early childhood initiatives and equipping parents and caregivers to succeed. And this is a story about how a community came together and did something remarkable for their children and families. Sierra, if you could go to the next slide, please. We'll see who we'll hear from today. The United Way of Southeast Louisiana serves as the backbone organization for the New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And today we are joined by their president and CEO, Michael Williamson, and their director of education and youth initiatives, Jillian Delos Reyes. We also have the honor of being joined by their coalition members representing different sectors. In addition to Michael and Jillian, we will hear from Ron McLean, Hamilton Simons Jones, Rochelle Wilcox, Bill Hammock, and Morgan Shannon. Please check out their collective years of experience on the biography sheet, which I will post soon in the chat. We will also be using some audience polls throughout our time together, and I do encourage you to participate. Please feel free to put any questions that may come to mind in the QA box and engage with us in the chat as well. We really look forward to hearing from all of you. Thanks for being here. So Sierra, we could launch the first poll. The team here with the campaign for grade level reading and also the New Orleans campaign is very curious about who is in the room. So we do have a poll here, which we would love for you to answer. Which role do you identify yourself? Do you see yourself as a funder, United Way staff, public sector staff, early childhood provider, community services provider, educator, or other? We'll leave that up for just a second. In the meantime, while this poll is up and while you're participating, I would like to introduce and offer the stage to Michael, who will share with us a little bit of background around how their campaign was started. So Michael, please kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you today. If you could pull up the next slide. If we could go to the blueprint slide, please. Thank you. And it's a real honor to be with you and you today, and you're going to be in for a real treat, I assure you, as you hear about our journey here in Southeast Louisiana, in particular, New Orleans. But let me just start with some brief background as to why we breathe new life, if you will, into the campaign for grade level reading in New Orleans. And I owe a significant debt of gratitude to my dear friend and colleague, Ron McLean, the Institute of Mental Hygiene, who brought this opportunity to our United Way to be, a partner and ultimately the backbone organization for what is now known as the New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading. But our purpose and our driver for all this is really rooted in our Blueprint for Prosperity, which is our plan to end poverty in Southeast Louisiana. You can see the graphic, which beautifully lays out our plan and our approach and how we identified issues. And this was based on a lot of feedback and input from the community. But we have known for a very, very long time that access to high quality early care and education is essential to long-term success. And so it's deeply rooted in our Blueprint for Prosperity. We also realize that equitable access and working on key drivers for prosperity meant that we would focus on how do we prepare our children for school by the time they reach the third grade and ensure that they read on grade level at that point. And so over our journey, we worked with collaborative partners to establish what is now known as the New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading. You'll hear more about that today. But it's rooted in this ideal of our blueprint, which believes that we must help families achieve stability today and help them on their pathways to economic prosperity so they can experience personal wellness and live in vibrant communities. And we all know that access to high quality early care and education is an essential part of that, and recognizing that what we can do for parents today will pay dividends in the future. And I'm in particular proud of the work we've done in our advocacy area, which you'll hear more about later. But this is an opportunity for you to learn from us, and hopefully in the future sessions, we'll be able to learn from you as well. But once again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I want to thank all of our collaborative partners you'll hear from. These are the rock stars. These are the people that do the real work. And United Way just happens to set the table and support them as they move along. And in particular, I want to thank Jillian Dillis Reyes, our Director of Education and Youth Initiatives, who has been our leader throughout this journey. Thanks again for the opportunity to be with you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor to be with everyone here today. My name is Jillian Dillis Reyes. As Michael just said, I'm the Director of Education and Youth Initiatives for our United Way. And I've had the honor of helping move this work forward with the New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading for the past several years. If I can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the New Orleans campaign is actually the only grade level reading campaign that exists in the state of Louisiana. And our challenge for our particular community is that only 34% of our children in New Orleans are reading on grade level by the time they reach third grade. For folks in the grade level reading community, you know why this is important, but for folks that are new to this or represent other sectors, third grade is a pivotal point in a child's educational progression. It is a point where a child should have all the foundational basics of how to read so that they can progress further and build their analytical skills, like how, not just learning how to read, but then learning reading for new information. So, and our vision for all of our children is that all the students in New Orleans read at grade level by the time they reach the end of third grade. We are about 6-7 years into our 10-year plan, and we bring certain strengths to this campaign and community. Our strengths are rooted in a few several facets. We mobilize a cross-sector of partners to support multiple strategies that speak to the different drivers of grade level reading readiness. We know that grade level reading readiness is rooted in 3 main drivers: school readiness, student attendance, as well as summer learning. So we have coordinated strategies that speak to all of that, but today's session, we're going to talk about some of the movement, community action, and policy advocacy we've been working on in the school readiness sector. We also create initiatives to fill identified gaps. If you want to learn more about how we're doing this in our summer learning space, definitely reach out to me after this webinar. I could definitely fill you in on that, but we're doing some really innovative work in our summer learning space to identify where quality, literacy, and learning can happen in our out of school time programming. We connect experts to local programs that need them, and we increase community awareness and understanding of what works. So helping our community members from all levels of community understand why grade level reading readiness is so important, not just for our children and families, but how it affects our community as a whole. Our New Orleans campaign for grade level reading is comprised of a large coalition. This work is not done alone. It really can't be done alone. We're a collaborative of leaders from government, business, education, families, members of the nonprofit sector, and educators who are committed to working together over the next decade to address this issue. And I'm really curious to know, we're going to issue a poll in just a moment, but I'm really curious to know, like, who are the trusted sources of information for community members about early childhood in your community? Great. And while we do that, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, co-conspirator, and co-founder of the New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading, Ron McLean.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here and good to be among such inspirational leaders who have committed to respond to the needs of children. And so the journey for me, and my job is to talk a little bit about the journey. So I'm executive director of the Institute of Mental Hygiene, which is a philanthropic organization. I'm also public policy committee chair for United Way of Southeast Louisiana. And I was introduced to the whole concept of grade level reading campaign when I was invited by the Annie E. Casey Foundation to a results-based leadership invitational. And it was all about how the community responds to challenges. And I was so inspired by Ralph Smith, who discussed communities, who discussed how the grade level reading campaign was designed to help communities develop solutions to problems for children. And part of homework for that invitation is that we had to bring data about reading proficiency. And I was so humbled to look at how much of a problem we had in this city with reading proficiency. As Julia mentioned, only 34% of children in our town was reading at grade level by the end of the 3rd grade. But among Black children, that number went to only 11%. Some 89%, almost 90% of Black children weren't reading at grade level by the end of the 3rd grade. And so I was inspired to relaunch the grade level reading campaign that was launched about in 2010. It had gone dormant. First thing I did was talk with Michael Williamson, who was the CEO of United Way of Greater New Orleans, United Way of Southeast Louisiana, actually. And he embraced the concept in a way that I'm still very awestruck by it. He said, what do we need to do? When do we need to do it? And so we joined together, the Institute of Mental Hygiene and the United Way of Southeast Louisiana to launch this campaign in 2016. And we got together and we thought about stakeholders to bring to the table. And so we wrote a letter after talking about the sobering data relative to children's reading proficiency. We invited folks to join the table with these words. The New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading seeks to bring the community together to draw a proverbial line in the sand. We said together we can improve 3rd grade reading proficiency, and that's what we've set out to do, to work in a collective impact strategy to improve reading proficiency. And where we landed at, obviously there were 3 major parts of responding to reading proficiency challenges, and one was school readiness. And we jumped on that because the data also indicated very few of our low-income children were able to access high-quality childcare, particularly children from ages 0 to 3. And we had an opportunity that came up right after Michael and I got together to relaunch the campaign, and that was the elections were coming up. We had an election coming up for mayor, and so we jumped on this opportunity to design a mayoral forum. And we were so impressed that all of the major candidates decided that they would participate in the forum. And so our campaign goal was to generate a commitment from New Orleans' next mayor to dedicate municipal funds in the city budget for high quality early care and education. And the goal of the forum was to provide an opportunity for the leading mayoral candidates to articulate their plans and positions related to young children and their families. And so every one of the major candidates committed to provide some municipal funding for early care and education. And so in 2018, we got a new mayor. And Mayor LaToya Cantrell fulfilled the promise that she had committed to during the forum by establishing the Office of Youth and Families, and initially providing some 300,000 or so to support access to free seats for low-income children, free childcare seats for low-income children. The next year, we advocated with the city council, and the city council stepped up this process, and this resulted in a $1.5 million commitment of city funds to go toward city seats. And so this doubled the mayor's initial commitment, which wasn't 300,000, it was actually 750,000. And so we went from 750,000 to 1.5 million. We continue to work and advocate. And so every year our city has to sort of develop a budget. And so every year we continue to advocate for additional funding out of the city coffers. In 2019, which was a major milestone, the city decided to invest some $3 million, which doubled their commitment to serve more children in need of quality seats. 2020, another milestone. Our campaign made its first attempt at passing a dedicated millage. The voters rejected this first attempt because it was coupled with a process that would result in less funding for the library. And so this controversy resulted in many of our citizens voting it down because they didn't want to negatively impact the library. We went back to the table and we decided that it made sense because it was such a compelling issue for our children and for our city in general that we should go solo and attempt to get a millage on our own with a number of partners, but not coupled with library funding or the lack thereof. So our campaign went back to the drawing board, and we worked to compare community relationships that resulted from the first attempt. And we had a groundswell of people who said that it made sense for the city and the state to invest in early care and education. Huge milestone. In April 2022, the campaign succeeded. This resulted in the first millage of its kind in the state. And we were so happy that New Orleans voters passed a ballot measure with 61% of the vote that would dedicate approximately $21 million a year in property tax revenue to fund early childhood seats, teacher retention, and wraparound support. So some 8 years after we started, after we encouraged people to draw this proverbial line in the sand, this resulted in a groundswell of support and a major campaign, Yes for NOLA Kids, where we're now, and we do believe that we've made significant progress. We have more work to do. And so I'm really happy now to pass it on to the next speaker, a good friend and a major leader in this effort, Hamilton Simons Jones. But in the meantime, there's another poll that we'd like you to respond to. And this is poll number 3. And the question is, which stage is your community in? Is it at the awareness? Is it at the stage where awareness is needed and a coalition has not been formed? Or a coalition has formed, but we are still starting to look at needs. And finally, we are in full process of planning a similar initiative. I'm happy to pass it on to my good friend Hamilton Simons-Jones of Resource Consulting.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you not just for passing it on now, but for involving me in this campaign going back to 2016. It's really been an honor and just truly amazing to see what incredible work we've been able to do and that we've been able to do together. There were some key messages that we used consistently as we were out to raise community-wide awareness about the need for, the importance of, and the opportunity to expand quality early childhood education. And so I'm going to walk you through a few of our slides that we have used pretty good, we use these everywhere, just to kind of help with the messaging. So first, many of you probably know the research of James Heckman. He's a Nobel Prize winning economist out of Chicago. And he has said that investing in the care and education of young children is the most efficient use of public resources. You can see his little chart about the return on investment. Depending on the study, it's anywhere from 7.5% to 16% return on every dollar invested. And I really start with this slide because we found that you really do have to make the economic and financial argument, which we found ourselves more increasingly leading with the more we did this work. And so this was kind of the foundation of it. If you go to the next slide, you can see we talk about just the critical foundation of early childhood education. Here in New Orleans, we're below sea level. We have even our roads are a little broken sometimes too. And so our houses, often many people understand the importance of a good foundation in your house and how expensive it is if there is an issue with the foundation. And we often use that analogy when talking about brain development and the fact that 90% of brain development occurs before a child reaches kindergarten. And that really determines the brain architecture that is the foundation that is either sturdy and you can build as high as you want on and it'll be okay, or is fragile and you're going to have issues no matter what you do on top of it. And if you go to the next slide, you all are probably quite familiar with much of this research, but we have it summarized here that, children who participate in high quality early care and education programs are less likely to require special education services. They're less likely to get behind or retained in school. They're less likely to drop out of high school before graduation. They're even less likely to develop chronic diseases in adulthood, and they're less likely to be engaged in the criminal or juvenile legal system. And that last point really actually became more and more important as we were going to voters in 2022, we saw significantly higher crime rates in our community, which is not unlike many communities coming out of COVID and just the economic and human impacts of that. And so that actually became an increasing issue in our campaign. If you go to the next slide, you can see just some of the stats in our community. And, in the fall of 2021, it was about 10,600 children birth to 3 who are economically disadvantaged, and 8,400 of those children could not access a publicly funded early childhood program. Those numbers were about 11,000 that lacked access when we started back in 2016. So this was even after we made some significant progress. And you could see the chart on the right that while we are at a place where we have a state-run LA4 program, Louisiana 4-year-old program, that now serves most 90-95% of our 4-year-olds, birth to 3, as Ron said, is really the gap and the challenge, to the point that, when we went into this, we only had 1 in 10 of our low-income infants that had access to a publicly funded early childhood seat, even though that the majority of both parents need to go back to work within, a couple of months of the birth, if not sooner. You go to the next slide, you'll see just some of the finances of it, right? I mean, we know this is low. This is a statewide average for the cost of infant care in a type 3 early learning center, which is a state licensed early learning program that accepts public funds. And, you know, for a family of 3 living at the poverty line, the cost of infant care is almost half of their income. And as you can see here, it is also exceeds the cost of a year at a public university. And so this is just infant care, but we know the ALICE research on asset limited, income constrained, and employed families, 52% of our families are either living below poverty or within that ALICE threshold, where they're a paycheck away from significant housing challenges, you know, a lost paycheck away from that. And so for most of our families, really being able to afford care is a huge barrier, and thus the need to be able to support them with public funding. So we designed this millage, and as Ron said, there was a failed attempt that would have generated $1.5 million a year in 2020. Go to the next slide, Sierra. We were able to do some polling and come back and go through, if you click one more time, there's just some figures on the left that are going to come up. One more time, yeah. And you can see here the language that was, back one, that was on the ballot, the proposition is on the right. And it was a 20-year property tax of 5 mills, which costs the average homeowner a little over $5 a month, and generates what we thought was an estimated 21 million. It actually looks like it's going to be a little higher than that. And we had, since the mayor's first investment of that 750,000, we had established the program called the City Seats program, which was specifically about providing high quality early care and education to children birth to 3. It is modeled after an early Head Start program. And so we already had a track record that now with this amount at 3 million before we went to voters with this millage, you know, was serving with state matching funds, which I'll talk about in a minute, was serving about 400 children. So this was a pitch to voters to expand something that we already had been operating and knew was working, and had childcare centers from across the city participating in, and families from across the city. One of the key things, even as we were working in those earlier years to get the city to invest, is that in 2016, the state legislature created the Louisiana Early Childhood Education Fund, which was a fund that could provide state matching dollars to incentivize local investment. No money was put in the fund for the first 4 years. But over time, there's now 5 funding sources that go into that fund, and there's been investments of one-time funds last year and proposed this year in the governor's budget. That allowed us to go to our local elected officials and say, look, for every dollar you put in, the state will match that dollar. So for every child we can serve with local dollars, the state is going to be able to turn that into 2 children with state dollars. So the millage actually positions us to be able to serve 2,000 children with high quality early care and education through the New Orleans City Seats program. And in terms of the millage funds, 75% of those local tax collections go into the seats with wraparound supports, which ends up being about $15,000 per child. And then the other 30% for the first 5 years is going into building the infrastructure to be able to have that kind of expansion of a public program in our community. Startup grants, expansion for centers that have been quality and have an opportunity to grow, outreach to families, helping them with the enrollment process, having that available in multiple languages, building up our teacher workforce to make sure both we have the professional development and support the retention of our current teachers, but also that we are training new ones to help us have more classrooms that are high quality. And then the program evaluation and oversight of the project. So with that, I think the final thing I want to say before I pass it on to many of the folks that really on the ground did the work to make all of this happen is to show you the partners that we engaged along the way. And so this next slide has the logos of the partners who endorsed the campaign along the way. If you'll go to the next slide, please. Great. And I want to point out a couple of things here. One is you have groups from the Business Council and the New Orleans Chamber and the business groups to many of the much more progressive grassroots organizing groups like the People's DA Coalition and the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. You got education groups, you have nonprofits, you have health-focused organizations, and then many of our political and civic engagement organizations. And so we want to talk a little more in a moment about how we built this coalition over time. But you also see right in the middle there that the GNOR with the elephant is the local Republican Party, which is right above the Democrats for Education Reform. And so we made this very intentionally a cross-sector and bipartisan issue and advocacy campaign. So with that, I want to launch our next poll. And you'll see on the screen in a minute, the poll question: what would your community need to move forward with a similar initiative? What are some of the supports you would need help with? Communications and marketing, fundraising, guidance on understanding the ballot process and how we get something on the ballot, help building a coalition like this to make it happen. And while you are responding to the poll, we're about to share, we have a few of the videos that we used in the campaign. And so we're going to share one of those videos. And this video shares the voices of many of our early learning providers who really are the backbone, not just of the campaign to pass it, but also the backbone to actually be able to deliver this work, which is now ramping up rapidly. And you'll meet and hear from Rochelle Wilcox, who's really been the leader in organizing the early childhood providers and really helping folks understand the importance of the advocacy work and making sure that this is not just professional advocates and nonprofit people, but is really the folks who are on the ground doing the work that families trust. So with that, we will start the video.
Affordable childcare
and accessible childcare
is just as important for parents
as it is for children.
Without it, many parents can't afford to go to work or to school,
and thus contribute to the local economy.
So I hope you join us in voting yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes. For NOLA kids.
For NOLA kids.
For NOLA kids.
April 30th, vote yes for NOLA Kids. Paid for by Ready Kids NOLA.
Hello, how are you? So again, my name's Rochelle Wilcox. And what I wanted to talk to you guys about is our coalition and For Providers by Providers. So For Providers by Providers was started, our nonprofit was started way back. I cannot see the slide, y'all. I'm sorry.
Affordable.
So we're going to go over the advocacy timeline, and then we'll talk about For Providers by Providers. So as a early learning center provider in New Orleans, or just in general, you are used to doing things and operating in a silo. You are behind your desk, making sure that your doors are open. What happened in the state of Louisiana is in 2012, Act 3 was passed, which means that there were a lot of things in the state that became a common things that all centers had to do. So there was a common enrollment process that had to happen, including in common funding sources and all of these things that really made a lot of centers start talking to each other, because this act passed, but there was no funding behind it. So a lot of talking started to happen. How are you doing this? What are you doing? So there was this organic things that was happening. So we started talking to each other. And then people started recognizing, because we're often marginalized, no one thinks that we know anything, even though we're doing all of the work on the ground, talking to parents, making sure all of the things that are implemented in public policy is being done. They started to recognize that our voice needed to be heard. So Agenda for Children, which is our local resource and referral agency that helps support all of our early learning centers, I was the first person to become a member of that board. That had never been done before. Then there was a steering committee that was formed because of the Act 3, who was the lead agency for all of this particular region. There was a provider that was put on that steering committee. The first provider joined the grade level reading steering committee, as Ron talked about earlier in 2016, and I was a part of that. There was a work group that was formed to say, okay, if we had funding, what are the things that we could possibly take funding from, or look at a funding source to put to sustain the early child care ecosystem, right? And so there was a workforce that was called upon by not only the grade level reading campaign, but by New Orleans public school system. So there were all of these stakeholders at the table, and we threw out all kinds of things. This was a workforce that we did, I think, 8 weeks or maybe more. And one of the things that we talked about was a millage and other funding sources that tax, several things that we talked about. And so we had a plan. From there, one of the things we started talking about was in 2019, I'm sorry, y'all, I'm in my office, so I apologize. So in 2019, we received $750,000 from the city, and Tam to talk about the city seats, and that was 50 children that we were able to start serving. In 2020, that was double. The city doubled that $750,000, and which was $1.5 million. And then we established 4 providers by providers. 4 providers by providers is a nonprofit that is woman-led, that is provider-led, that is minority-led, that builds the capacity of providers around the state of Louisiana, but specifically in New Orleans, that makes sure that their voices are heard in public policy. We do capacity building around leadership, wealth building, and professional development to make sure that we are lifting up their voice. So if there is something that is going on, we are at the front line. No more will we allow policy to be made and we don't have a seat at the table. So during this huge campaign that we started, we galvanized all of the type 3 early learning center providers in the city to make sure that our voices were heard, that we talked to our parents, educated the providers. And it was hard. We took a hit when we were really excited about this $1.5 million, even though it was coupled with the library. We thought it was something. Finally, somebody saying we can give early learning some money. And then when we were on the ground, waving signs, getting our parents out there, and people were not so nice to us. And then when it failed, it was something about re-galvanizing that community. Because again, even though we had our allies like Agenda for Children, like Louisiana Policy Institute, the grade level reading steering committee, it was us. It was our businesses that were impacted. It was our children, our families that were disappointed that they finally were getting their voices heard, but disappointed by this measure not passing. So we had to go back and re-galvanize and talk to those families and say, you know what, just because it didn't pass this time doesn't mean it won't pass next time. And then when we were able to see that this was another opportunity, not only to go back at it again, but to get more funding and to be the only thing on the ballot, which was great, but scary at the same time, because we knew that it would take more to get people out to vote for this only thing on the ballot. But if you show people that they matter, they're going to call their friends. They are going to call their family members, their co-workers. Everybody had to see them in this picture, including the business owners, including the parents, the teachers. And so we educated all of that. We had advocacy boot camps. We had weekly calls. We trained. We use other child care center facilities to coach, to train, to hold signs every week. Well, 3 days out the week, we were doing canvassing. On every Saturday, we did 10 hours of phone polling and calling. We got over 100 hours. Oh, this, I'm talking from my mind. Here's the here's the slide. So again, in January, volunteers dedicated 100 hours of getting people registered to vote. And the parents were just so excited. The teachers were excited. And it was because it mattered to them. And people started to see, okay, I really make a difference, right? I can really make a difference. And then when it happened, everybody was calling. Like my 80-year-old mother was out there, my son, and to hear them, and he's 21, 22, something like that, to hear them be able to say, this is the reason why it matters. No, I'm not a parent right now, but if I was a parent, this is what you would need. And it just mattered to make sure that everybody could tell the story. So we had over 800 hours of voter phone banking, 300 hours of early voting measures. We made food for them. We had early voting people going to the poll. It was a phenomenal engagement of parent, providers, teachers, getting out and making sure that we got this measure passed. Oh, I'm sorry, y'all. I got into it. I am going to shoot it over to, we couldn't do it without Bill. Bill Hammock is a leader and engaging in the business community. And let me tell you, we were able to tell our story as the providers, but it wasn't until we really engaged the business community and Bill was able to tell the story about how there is no economy without early care and education and without the business community and telling that business story. So I am going to throw it over to Bill and say, again, thank you for, championing us. And here you go, Bill.
Thank you, Rochelle. I will tell you, all the people on this call, you need to know that there was a tremendous team that came together from diverse backgrounds and different approaches to this very serious problem, worked together to make something incredible happen. This millage is $21 million a year for 20 years and will grow with inflation increase in property values. So essentially, we're talking about $500 million impact to this very, very important issue. Now, all of you come from a perspective that early education and child care is critically important for different reasons. If you think about the business community, some of the things that are important there is a little bit different. We were able to bring a message that talked about workforce development, talked about economic development, talked about return on investment. The goal was to be able to bring a message that would resonate with business leaders, because those business leaders are influential. They are also politically connected. We needed their support. And in order to make that happen, we needed to make sure that we had the right message when we talk to business groups. A helpful tool was this report that you see on the slide called Losing Ground. That was done by the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children with the support of the Louisiana State University, as well as funding by Entergy Corporation, our power company here. And it pointed out some very dramatic data that resonated with the business community. And it had to do with the people that we employ in our various businesses. For parents with children aged 4 and under, childcare resulted in more than 16% of those employees quitting their job, 14% turning down a promotion, and many having to go from full-time to part-time. That is dramatic as you think about having a dependable workforce that you can count on every day to be in your workplace and doing what they need to do to make your business successful. And lost time. Over 50% of the families that we interviewed had missed work on a regular basis due to childcare issues. Again, if you look at the total impact here in New Orleans, almost 70+% of the available parents in a household, that would be whether it's a two-parent household or a one-parent household, had to work. And so if we lose that ability for those people to be effective in their jobs, it has a tremendous impact on the businesses that we all own. Across the state, that impact was registered at $762 million a year, and the overall economic impact about $1.3 billion. You start talking about those kinds of numbers and those kinds of percentages, businesses and business owners, they want to know, well, what can we do about that? And we were able to deliver the message that if we invest in early childhood education, that we would get a return on investment, that it would make this problem better and have a positive impact on our community. As part of our campaign, we solicited some of the most influential business owners and people with high profile in our community to become our advocates. And we produced a TV spot that featured 4 of those prominent business owners. I'd like to show you that now. Can we show the video?
Investment in early childhood education is an investment in people that will pay dividends, big dividends.
For about $5 a month for the average homeowner in New Orleans.
Now that's about the price we pay for a daily cup of coffee.
You can have early childhood education and change someone's life forever.
So on April 30th, make sure that you get to the polls and that you vote yes.
Vote yes.
Vote yes.
Vote yes for NOLA Kids.
Paid for by Ready Kids NOLA.
I will tell you that these voices that you just heard, you know, from Alden and Walt and Henry and Joe, those are people who are known in our communities. They are prominent. They are very, very strong civic leaders. And if we can go past to the next slide, past this, next one here. And so they had a tremendous credibility in the messaging that was delivered on our television and social media platforms. The other very important point for the business community is, well, if we spend this money, is it going to be well stewarded? Is there going to be accountability? Is there people who are credible in place to administer these programs? And we were able to build on the fact that the program had been in place, the City Seats program, for a number of years. I think we'd been in actually funding seats for about 5 or 6 years before we asked for this raise. And we also put together with our input and the input of the other partners, a cooperative endeavor agreement that outlined the specific rules that would be in place to make sure that this investment was properly administered. It requires that the funding mechanism requires that the organizations that are going to get these dollars report back on a monthly basis to our city council. They also have to report an annual report. They are being audited by outside agencies, and on an ongoing basis, on a quarterly basis, they're meeting with our city council and they're talking about where they are, what they've accomplished, and what they need to be doing going forward. So a lot of accountability and credibility important to the business community. I have one more slide, I believe, that I'd like to share with you. Do I have one more slide? Yes, actually two more. We have a government watchdog group here in New Orleans called the Bureau of Governmental Research. And over the years, it is an organization that has a very large board of directors, all of which are from the business community. The BGR reports are issued on a random basis, but almost always when there's a tax measure on a ballot. And they offer an opinion based on that tax language and what that tax is supposed to accomplish. And they do a lot of research. Well, our team, those of us working on this campaign, met with BGR on probably 4 or 5 occasions, provided them with input on the cooperative endeavor agreement, on the statute itself, what it was going to be intended to accomplish, and the checks and balances that were in place. We're thrilled that when they finally issued their report, they recommended a yes vote on this initiative. It was a big deal to have this group supporting the initiative. In addition, we went to the media. We can slip to the next slide. We were proactive. We actually asked the local newspaper if we could meet with their editorial board. There's also a weekly magazine that has a lot of influence in New Orleans called Gambit. And we sat down with them and we let them pepper us with questions. And we were able to answer those questions and answer them effectively, to the point that we got the local media to endorse the campaign. And that was a big influence, as well as getting voters to the poll and getting them to vote yes. One little anecdote: it's a lot easier to defeat a tax proposal than it is to get one passed. We got word of an influential columnist and a pollster who was having really second thoughts about our campaign and was going to write a series of columns negatively on the proposal. And we were able to meet with him one-on-one and essentially talk him off of that position, tell him all of the reasons this is important from a business perspective. And it made a huge difference, because we ended up with no really strong organized opposition to the tax. And that was one of the reasons that we were able to get it passed. Be happy to answer more questions in the Q&A section. And now I'm going to turn it over to Morgan Shannon, the Director of Strategic Partnerships with the Power Coalition. Morgan.
Thank you, Bill, and good afternoon, everybody. I am Morgan Shannon, and I am with the Power Coalition. We are a statewide civic engagement table that works to build power in Louisiana for Black and Brown people around several issues and several ways, including electoral justice, in which that's what we're going to talk about today. And we were a part of the voter mobilization strategy for the Yes for NOLA Kids campaign. The Power Coalition is an organization of organizations, and so many organizations are part of the Fist of Power, and many of them are base building organizations, and we all work together to mobilize and move folks along a continuum. And so we were a part of the Yes for NOLA Kids campaign. As many people mentioned, this has been a long time coming. And I think that that is very interesting, because a lot of folks want to always make things like this happen, like it happened overnight. And one of the things that the speakers have mentioned is that this was not a phenomenon. This was a long time coming of a lot of things that have happened over the years, things that where we didn't win, where you heard that we had this on the ballot before and we put it against something that families and communities need. We put it against the library, and people were asking, well, why do we have to choose between the library and additional seats for young people? And why do we have to take away from things that we know are necessities for us to be able to get something else that's a necessity for us? And then you heard my colleague, Rochelle, said that this was the only thing that was on the ballot. And so I want to tell you a little bit of the Power Coalition's, one of our secret sauces. And one of our secret sauces is our ability to be able to mobilize people and get them to the ballot and them to be able to vote in their best interest. And that is one of our secret sauce and one of our special powers, is that we're able to mobilize voters and get them to the ballot and to make sure that they vote in their best interest. And how do we do that? We do that by having deep conversations at the door, and when COVID hit, over the phones and via text message with the people of New Orleans and all over the state of Louisiana. And really what we were hearing from voters over the 7 years that we have been in existence is that, wow, nobody has ever even been asking me, what do I want? What would be helpful to me? And why that was so phenomenal that we were able to win is that, one, that was the only thing on the ballot. Two, we vote a lot here in Louisiana, and I mean a lot. Like, I always joke and say that we vote every second Saturday in Louisiana, because that's how many elections that we have. Just this year, we've already had three elections, and last year we had 6, and this was the only thing on the ballot. And so to be able to mobilize people to be able to win when this was the only thing on the ballot really took a comprehensive effort of everyone. And so while we've been talking to folks at the door about what do they want, and we were saying, hey, can you vote? Hey, did you know that there was an election? People were saying, yeah, I'll vote. And I understand how important voting is, because that also is something that we do not do. We don't shame people for voting. We don't say, oh, you should vote because your life depends on it, or vote or die, you know, all of that kind of gloom and doom type of things, because folks are really dealing with a lot and they have a lot of things going on. And I always say that we have a lot going on, not that we have anything else going on more than maybe other folks have in other parts of the country, but we have to make sure that people's immediate needs are taken care of before we ask them to do anything. And so people were saying, yeah, I'll go vote, but I want to make sure that my child or my grandchild or my little love next door or whatever has an early care center to be able to go to. That's the kind of conversations that we were having at the doors. And so when people ask why a traditional civic engagement organization got into this early ed and education work, this is why, because we were having these conversations at the door and people were asking us questions and saying things to us about what impacted them and what it meant for them to vote and what they wanted to see different. And this is the things that they were saying. And so we understood that it was our duty to make sure that people showed up, because this is something that they could feel. Oftentimes, people are voting for things, and they're voting for things that are such up ballot that they might not feel that impact on their everyday life. But this was something that they could feel. This was something that they could feel, that a little person in their life would still be little, and they could feel this. We also do a really great job of breaking down things in a language that is digestible for everyone. Not only just language justice, which is really important to make sure that that words and our handouts and our people who are knocking on our doors are representative of the community, so that you can see them at your grocery store, barring that there is one in your neighborhood, but you can see them at your grocery store, your place of worship, or wherever else you might go. But or they're your neighbor, but that also the things that you're giving out are in a language that they can read, but that the people and the conversations are at the door are something that they can understand and they can take back. We also did things, we met people where they were. So we did it in faith institutions. We made sure that we had biking votes. And so biking is a really, really big in the culture in New Orleans. And so we had bike and vote. We also made sure we had it at the faith institutions. We provided transportation. We used some of the funeral homes as transportation services, some of the school buses. We partnered with the transit authority to provide free rides, just a lot of different avenues. We also made sure that we provided like crawfish and things like that, that would bring people over to say, what are they talking about? And then they would see what we were talking about, and then we would educate them on what was happening. And so because we talked and because they saw the Power Coalition and they know that we were going to be in their community often, they knew that we were talking about something that was going to be on the side of equity and justice that might benefit them, and they wanted to hear what we had. But it was also having conversations with them about things they told us. They told us that there used to be more early care centers in their neighborhood, and now there's not. And so that we could come back to them and say, well, you said this to us, and now you see what we're talking about. And then, of course, what all my fellow panelists have been saying, I saw this on the news, I saw this on the radio. The mothers of the community would hear a radio show, or maybe heard their faith leader say something in church and bring it back to their community, and so on and so forth. And so what you see on the screen are some of the messaging that resonated. I do want to hit you with some data, because I would be remiss if I didn't say how many calls we were able to make. 125,000 calls. We sent almost close to 1 million texts. We knocked on almost 50,000 doors and did a lot of digital ad impressions on all social media, including some streaming ads as well. And so we were really happy to be able to partner on this. And here's the thing that's so great about partnership and the way that Power Coalition does work. Now, after we went and asked everybody to vote on this, now as we're knocking on doors again, because remember I told you that we vote every second Saturday, so there was like 50-11 elections after this too, and it's been like 50-11 elections since then. Everybody's like, yeah, so what about that millage? What about that millage? What's going on with the millage? And we get the pleasure to tell everybody what's happening with the millage. And so I just really think that we're using our field infrastructure and the ways that we've been able to knock on doors and having these crucial conversations and knocking on doors and really being able to mobilize and organize in community as a way to make sure that voting isn't transactional, that people are actually able to hold their elected officials accountable, to have those to knock down the barriers of democracy and meeting people where they are and bringing democracy to their front door. And so I think I turn it, that's all that I have. And Power Coalition was honored to be a part of this. I also forgot that I talk really fast, so I also forgot that there was translation. I apologize for that. I will work on slowing down. But until then, I will pass it to Jillian. Thank y'all.
It's hard to slow down, Morgan. We have so much to share. You know, such a rich involvement in this work. And so, folks, you know, as you heard, we have a lot of really engaged folks in this coalition, and we've learned a lot today. But there's a few things that we want to make sure that you take with you at the end of this session. You know, we have been telling our story from, this is like years of work in the making. And like I said earlier, we can't do this alone. So the first takeaway is that you need to build a broad coalition. You need to draw your base and identify folks in your community that identify this as a key and important issue in your community, and the importance of quality early education as it affects like the many layers and systems within your municipality and community. Secondly, root your case for action with solid data. The numbers make a difference. Bill was talking about how engaging the business community really hit the ground. We were talking about the dollars lost when we don't invest in our young people and the families that rely on quality education. Morgan was talking about all the voter engagement and the data points that really helped us tell our story. But this is also a human issue with human stories. So beyond quantifiable data, qualitative data is important too. So, gather the human stories that really bring this down to the human level and make it really approachable for folks within your community. And lay the groundwork. This work doesn't happen overnight. We went through a timeline that talks about how this was years in the making. And what's really important is keeping a drumbeat, like having folks in your coalition that, remind us all while we're at the table, like why we're doing this work. Because again, this doesn't happen overnight, and you need folks that are committed to doing this year after year, and, and acknowledging the wins and the losses that come with it. And for the fourth point, engage a cadre of diverse stakeholders that have the ability to access different levers of power within your community. A big part of my role, so you heard from like so many like dynamic and wonderful people that are part of this coalition. And a part of my role is identifying folks who to bring to the coalition, bring to the table. And a lot of times they take the reins from there because they take their expertise and their passion and they know how to activate what they do best in their sectors. So make sure that you have a broad representation within your coalition that know how to get into these meetings and rooms and decision-making tables. So, make sure that you have, like I said, diverse representation. So beyond nonprofit partners and advocates, are you engaging the early care providers and the staff that do this work every day? Are you engaging your business community? Are you engaging parents and caregivers that live this need every day, and beyond? Next slide, please. And it's really important that you tailor your message that speaks to the distinct values of those different stakeholder groups. What may be important for the business community in terms of bottom line and dollars lost and all those data points that Bill was talking about may not ring so hard and true for other folks that work, say, for an early care provider or a parent that's just trying to find ways to get their child to a safe, quality learning environment so they can get to work. So what may really speak to one community may not speak to another pocket of your community. So make sure that you are speaking directly to the folks that you need to bring to the table and that you identify the values that really drive them. And then for the next point, educate yourself on the policies and procedures, and enlist the support of experts that can help you along on this process. What we've learned in the couple of attempts that took us to this millage win is that people want to help. There's answers out there, there's resources out there. We're here to help you also. What we learned on this journey is that this is an important issue for a lot of people, and we received help and resources in ways that were beyond what we could dream. So ask questions, reach out to folks in your community. And the worst thing that can happen when you ask for help is people say no, but a lot of the times they say yes. And it's also really important to understand who is standing in opposition of the mission and vision of what you're trying to pursue, and understand why they stand opposed. And make sure that you have a counterpoint for every opposition point that folks that are challenging you bring to the table. And most importantly, never give up. I would say we learn more about ourselves and what we're made of and how we work together through our losses more than our wins. And I think that, without the loss, the first attempt of the millage, there was a lot of things that we came back stronger in the second attempt. So just know that, again, this work doesn't happen overnight. You got to lay the groundwork. You got to bring folks to the table that can really move this work forward, and know that, sometimes you won't win for every attempt, but that gives you a learning opportunity and the momentum to move forward and keep going. So I hope that everyone that is on this journey, keeps that drumbeat going for yourself and your community, because there is opportunities to build these resources and accesses for your community. And we're excited and here to help you wherever you are on that path. I think we're going to open it up to Q&A. But before we do that, I just want to thank all of our panelists and presenters today. I've had the opportunity to work with these folks for the past several years, and they are the folks that make this coalition run. They're the ones behind the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, that have been behind this work for years and years and years. So I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank our National Campaign for Grade Level Reading for providing this opportunity to connect with all of you today and to share our story. The final takeaway is that, above all the details and the timeline and all of the points of our journey, is that the power in this work is in the power of your partnerships. If you can engage your community in authentic ways that speak to the values of the folks that represent the communities and cities and neighborhoods that you live in, that moves the work forward. So make sure that you hold sacred the power of partnerships in your community. And I'm going to turn it back to Malai and the team for Q&A. Thanks so much.
Oh, Jillian, I have goosebumps actually, your last couple of words there. Thank you so much for that. And I'm excited to have some questions for the full team now in hearing your story. And if, I invite the audience to, if you have questions that you're thinking about as you listen to their powerful story, please feel free to add those. So I do want to speak to that concept of partnerships, that last note that you hit, Jillian, and the idea of trust and building authentic relationships with your partners. Bill described in his piece about some of the partners with prominent business owners and how important that was to the success of the campaign. I'm curious if there were any other unlikely partners or allies who joined you, any groups or organizations that you didn't expect that came along. And can you just talk a little bit about maybe some unexpected partners that came as part of your journey? And this question's for anybody.
Well, I'll speak to one. Obviously, this is an issue that 10 years ago was a more to the left issue than the right. And from a political perspective, our ability to engage prominent Republican members of our community, and we actually got a check for $5,000 from the Republican PAC here in New Orleans. Those were things that added credibility when we were talking to people who are more to the right than to the left. So I would say that would be one that was important in getting messaging that was credible to a bipartisan audience.
Great, thank you, Bill. Are there any others? Hamilton, what do you think?
Yeah, I would just add, I think sometimes our advocacy work gets really siloed, and there are folks who are advocating on different issues that we all believe in, but we don't always work together. And so I think, there were a number of partners in the health space, and, American Heart Association and Voices for Healthy Kids is really great about helping connect early care and education and health issues and health outcomes. So I would add the health, a number of health nonprofits and health coalitions, as well as a number of groups. A lot of the Power Coalition's work has been around justice system and the criminal legal system and efforts to reform in that area. And there were a number of partners that came from that work as well, right? You saw the People's DA Coalition, you saw Court Watch NOLA, that normally wouldn't necessarily get involved in early care and education, but by virtue of the relationships and the partnerships and the momentum we had been building, they recognize that this is an issue that impacts their constituents and their concerns as well.
Great.
Yes, and I would add, elected officials, particularly the city council and the school board members, who are often sort of really cautious about supporting taxes. And oftentimes they have their own ideas and their own agendas about how they might want to use, money from ballot initiatives, and they supported this wholeheartedly. I was quite surprised at the level of passion exhibited by some of the city council members. And they really helped convince the administration to double and subsequently triple the initial investment. So those were partners that we can't lose sight of. Folks who you think might be resistant, you have to ask them. You just have to ask them. And I know I was surprised about the level of passion and commitment from the elected officials.
But I also want to add to that, it took years of educating, years of building relationships, having meetings, going to lunch, having them come into the centers. It took years of building those relationships. And then right before then, we had a whole new city council that we had to re-educate because it was a new election. So it was some people who we knew, but it was a lot of rebuilding, but it was because we had did all of that work over years and managing people's expectations too. Like this is a lot of work that happened. It was not overnight, but it was worth it. And it was not overnight.
I would like to plus one that to Rochelle's comment. I do definitely think that that's really important. And you'll see that like, oh, in other states, or when we see things that make nationwide news, we want this and we want that, and you just kind of getting the tail end of the story. You're not seeing the coalition support, the cross-sector support, the years, so I just would like to plus one what Rochelle said about decades in the making. And then also parents that decided to be elected officials, or small business owners that decided to become big business owners, or like Bill was saying around just putting party lines down and making sure that we invest in what's right. And so wanted to say how long things sometimes take.
Thank you,
There's one
Morgan.
more pocket of community that we haven't mentioned, but it's really important in New Orleans, and I'm sure speaks to a lot of communities here on this call today, but faith communities also. So we spoke to a lot of faith leaders and their congregations. You have a built-in audience when you engage faith community within your cities and municipalities. So don't forget your faith leaders.
Thanks, Jillian. I do want to call attention to a question that came up in the QA from Marissa, who's asking, what is your number one piece of advice for gathering a coalition and managing one effectively in ECE? I feel that this is a piece that anyone can speak to, so this would be for all panelists if you'd like to jump in. What is your number one piece of advice, if you had to give a piece of advice, for gathering a coalition and managing one effectively?
I think patience, having a lot of patience, and also with any gathering of diverse groups, you have to make time for process. And sometimes we struggle with that when we're so task oriented, but I learned a lot over the years that process makes all the difference in the world, particularly as it relates to partnerships and engagement, that you have to spend some time to let folks vent and tell their stories. And the other piece is never forget to involve people with lived experience. Rochelle can talk and, just so passionate about doing the thing, where the rubber, hits the road. And those were lessons that we learned that were invaluable.
Thanks, Ron.
Having the privilege of working with folks for the past several years is that, identify your partner's strengths and their values. So as you're building your talking points, you're already identifying what strengths that your partners bring to the table, because our coalition is so diverse and everyone has different priorities and missions and visions that they're trying to push forward for their businesses and their organizations independently outside of this campaign. So what is it if you could think of a Venn diagram, what is the core thing that brings us all together? What is the value that strings all of us together? So identify that and make sure that you leverage those strengths that your partners bring to the table, that they feel valued, like their values are activated in this work.
I love that. Morgan, you have the floor. I see your hand up.
To me, a coalition should lower the transaction cost of somebody being a part of it. Like folks have usually when you're part of a coalition, you have other things to do outside of the coalition. It sounds kind of harsh and transactional. And I don't feel like I'm a harsh transactional person, but that's what I mean. You know, and I often, sometimes it seems a little bit like intense coalitions can be. Like you have to do a lot of different works. There's all these Google Docs, you got to fill this out, you got to fill that out. You know, you got to come to 5011 meetings and all these things. And it's just like, okay, but I also have to do this whole other part of my job. And I do think that there should be some type of transaction cost lowered, that we're stronger together and that I am a benefit to this coalition. Like it's making my work a little easier, and not that I'm not supposed to labor a little bit and that it's not going to be a heavy season perhaps for me, because maybe this season of the coalition, this is really my jam. But there should be some type of transaction costs lowered. And if that means, this is not always the case with coalitions, but that we might need somebody to hold it outside of one entity, you know, we have to maybe look at that. But I definitely think that being a part of the coalition, some organization or a person's transactions costs should be lowered. Also, if people's lived experiences are going to be a part of the coalition, we might have to alter the ways in which we do things. Many times we do things within a white supremacy framework, like a 9 to 5, and I mean, that's fine. That's like that's how the world is. It's not fine, but that's just how the world is. Like, and until we change that, that's just the way it's going to tick. But we have to understand that folks with lived experiences might not tick that way. And it sounds great in theory, but then like, what are we altering about ourselves to make sure that we are a little uncomfortable as we're trying to make them comfortable?
I appreciate that. And really that's making me think a lot about the important role that volunteers played with this mobilization effort, and what you've shared, Morgan, and also with what you shared, Rochelle, and the amount of hours and time and energy that volunteers played for this effort in bringing the community together. Can you, both of you, talk a little bit about how you managed all of that? If any of us, part of coalition work, you know, that volunteer engagement is really super critical, and I think for this one is especially critical. So in what ways did you manage that volunteer piece and prep volunteers for all of the door knocking and all of the work that they would have to do?
So let me say this. We also garnered some grant funding to pay the volunteers as well. To pay parents, to pay teachers, to pay them for their time. Which was super important to us, because these are, if they're going to our centers, if they're getting this funding source, they're usually low income families. So if they're coming to spend 8 hours, 4 hours, whatever, we wanted to make sure that they were paid for their time. So that was one thing. So I wanted to make sure that was something, and people don't usually look at that, you know, as an opportunity. So that was one, but then we did have a volunteer boot camp and our training, and it was offered, I think, several times. I can't remember how many times. It's been a while, where it was after hours. It was not held twice. You know, it was not held at 10 o'clock in the day, or, you know, at 3 o'clock. It was held after hours, so that, you know, people who are working people could attend, and it was held several times. There was a text chain. They had someone who was supporting them the day of. We not only held a training for the people who were going out canvassing and doing this, but we also held trainings for the providers who will open their doors. What does it look like? You know, let's maybe make sure we have water or juice, or, you know, some food for them. And there was other things that was, so there was a person that was in charge of doing all of those things, tables, things that you didn't even think about, like you would need to make sure that volunteers were okay for that time frame. And then getting other people, there was a script, people feeling comfortable. And I know we're maybe limited on time, but let me just tell you this one thing. Making sure people understand, because the other piece about having people go out and speak about it, there were people who had questions, right? They're knocking on doors and things like, and people who had questions, and they might not have felt comfortable with answering those questions. And sometimes that made them feel afraid. But having a follow-up, oh, you know what, that's a great question. Here's a number where you can call, or here's some more information where you can call and get more information, so people don't feel intimidated by somebody asking an additional question. There was a frequently asked question kind of thing we put together, but there were people who asked more than that. But there was, you know, something we learned that day one, like, oh, this was outside of the frequently asked questions. So this was something else that we had to get, you know, we had to learn. So there are going to be additional things that you learn as you go in, but to keep moving, and then to assure your volunteers that they have support and they have other things that they could do.
Thanks, Rochelle. And that actually was one. Oh, Bill, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we don't leave this conversation without pointing out that we did this very professionally as well.
Mm-hmm.
We created a political campaign committee, which is like a political action committee, except it's for a single issue. We hired professionals to help us with this organization, with organizing volunteers, with helping us with the media campaigns. We raised money. And you know, this was a real professional effort that was supported by a huge number of volunteers and people within the community that was passionate about this issue. But I can't tell you that how important the work that Hamilton did and the other people who were involved in actually making this happen strategically. Yeah. And that was a big part of this success, is that we made sure that we empowered people like Rochelle and her team, but we supported them financially, and we supported them with the materials they needed to be successful.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. All right, I think I have time for maybe one more question. And this one is about the, oh yeah, here's our continuous improvement poll. So please do complete that as you're listening to this last question that we have. For me, like it's pretty obvious the big win here is the approval of the voter measure, but I'm sure there were other things that the team celebrated, and maybe some smaller wins that you learned along the way, some needs that you found out about that you know that you'll have to come around in another initiative perhaps. So were there any other smaller wins or unintended wins that happened along the way of this journey that you can speak to or that you can share out?
I could name a whole bunch, but
I bet.
I mean, the investment in the city, the initial investment from the city was huge. And then our doubling that each year for the next couple of years, those were huge victories. And those were kind of like helped us build the muscle of turning people out and making sure they're on message and, figuring out how to have the coalition and have it mobilized when we need it. And then I think on the campaign journey, there were some huge wins as well. Getting the count, in New Orleans, the only way to get something on the ballot is legislative. You cannot circulate a petition and get 20,000 signatures and put it on the ballot. The only way is that we need the city council to approve it. And so that getting to that vote in early January for the campaign in April was huge. And, I think the one other win that I would name along the way was the polling. So when we lost in December 2020 about the libraries, we then went and did a poll to test what is the voter sentiment and how much would they be willing to pay in a new tax? Because the conversation before that was only about repurposing existing tax dollars, which is how we ended up in this situation where we got to cut libraries to fund young children, like Morgan was saying. And so that poll came back showing that they were willing to pay what we thought at the time was more than we would have ever proposed on the tax to get to that $5 million tax. And so that polling then gave us, honestly, the combination of the polling and the previous loss gave us the chance to really shape the ballot in more of our dream measure, as opposed to what do we think we might be able to get from voters as little, I mean, not to dismiss $1.5 million, but like, you know, changing the couch cushions in comparison.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Hamilton. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Any
I
other
think
small wins? Go
yeah, I
ahead,
think
Ron.
another win, which is huge, is that I think we educated the community about how important it is to invest in early care and education
Oh, yeah.
and the return on investment. There's more and more people who are talking about brain architecture during the first 3 years of life. More and more people are talking about 13% return on investment. More and more people are talking about how important it is to our community and to our business community, the workforce. All of these things are so connected to quality early care and education. We've changed the narrative, and that's a huge win.
Oh, the beautiful segue actually to our last slide, which is more things that you can learn from Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Well said, Ron. Thank you. I want to take a moment while Sierra's pulling up that last slide about what we have coming up in our webinars, just to thank the whole team here from the New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading and everybody who worked so hard on this initiative. When I heard this story, when Jillian and I were talking, like, this absolutely has to be shared out publicly through our national spotlight. Just so much to learn here and so many takeaways. So thank you so much. I do see a question here that popped up in the chat box. So if one of you could take that, that would be awesome. And I'll go ahead and describe our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays that are coming up. We have one this afternoon about the funding cliff, local supports for high impact tutoring, and funder to funder conversation about investing in kindergarten. This speaks to what you're saying, Ron. So much to learn about early childhood and the importance of early childhood work. Learning Loss Recovery Challenge on April 18th, building a parent-centered ecosystem for OST. And finally, towards the end of this month, we'll be talking about a framework for sustainable systemic change. So with that, I want to once again give a warm thank you to all of our panelists and a warm thank you to all of us that joined today. And please visit us again in May. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.